afternoon and welcome. My name's Sean. I'm from Think 32. I'd like to thank you for coming along today to today's event in conjunction with the Gas Yard Fela. I'd like to thank the Gas Yard Fela for including us in their massive programme of events, and I hope you've enjoyed watching them during the week. Today's panel discussion is asking the question, what should the governments be doing in relation to the question of Irish unity? The conversation on unity has grown massively over the past number of years, and we believe it will continue to grow. Recent comments made by some of the major players in politics, such as Leo Varadkar and Mary McAleese, are an indication that many are now starting to take notice. Even some of the EU leaders believe that see unity as the most sensible solution to the Brexit problem. America is also paying attention and watching intently as the British government seem to be reneging on the Brexit deal. Partition has been the cause of many problems faced within not only the 6 counties, but also in the 26. On both sides of the border, there's a growing conversation and a feeling that there is a better way, an opportunity to make asylum work for everyone, not just a few. Many see the potential of unification and are now beginning to ask the question, well, why not? Think 32 also believe not only has partition divided our country, it has also caused a division in our people. Irish unity will, we believe with time, allow this division to heal. But a civic society through groups like Think 32, Ireland's Future and Shared Ireland, through the GA in many counties, several trade union groups, and a growing number of councils across this island begin to ask or continue to ask questions of the government. There seems to be very little happening. This is where I'll hand over to our chair today, Dondre Murphy. Again, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to listen, and I hope you enjoy this panel discussion.
Good Sean and Ushla. And buíochas to Think 32 and Gas Yard Failure for what is a very timely discussion, I think everyone will agree. And I want to acknowledge the particular efforts of the organisers and the participants to ensure that this is a gender balanced discussion today, because that's very welcome also. We have a very short time to discuss constitutional change on the island of Ireland. So what I want to do is jump right in, if that's okay. And the format of this evening will be a series of questions to which everyone gets to answer the questions, but also to engage with each other's points as we go along. And we'll certainly work to ensure everyone has equal time in what is a brilliant panel. I think everyone will agree. So first of all, what I'll do is I'll introduce the panel and then we'll jump straight into the questions. And I'll do it in alphabetical order if that's okay. So our first panelist is Martina Anderson. She's the Sinn Féin MLA for Derry, and she's the former MEP and a junior minister for the late Martin McGuinness up in Stormont. Then we have Stephen Farry, who's the Alliance MP for North Down. And when I asked him how he wanted to be introduced, he says, just say Stephen. So hopefully by the end of this, we'll get to know who Stephen is a bit more. Colin Harvey is professor at Queen's University and a colleague of my own as a member of Ireland's Futures Management Board, and a very, very excellent contributor to the promotion of the discussion on Irish unity. Niamh Smith joins us today as well. She's the Fianna Fáil TD for Cavan Monaghan, and she's the spokesperson for Arts and Heritage, and she's very welcome to be part of this discussion this evening. Certainly the first time I'll have heard her chatting about the constitutional change. The SDLP's Brian Tierney also joins us. He was co-opted onto Derry City Council in January 2014. Brian was elected to represent the Ballyaarnet area of Derry and Strabane Council a few months later and re-elected in 2019. And he served as Mayor of Derry City and Strabane District Council in 2020, which doesn't seem like it should be over yet, but here we are halfway through 2021. So I'm going to jump in with the first question, and I'll start with the alphabetical order, and then I'm going to mix it up after that, if that's okay. In this centenary year, centenary of the establishment of the Northern State or the centenary of partition, how do you see the status of the constitutional debate now? And has that status and where it is now changed really over the course of your professional and political lifetime? So I'll start with Martina.
Go Martina Agaf and Tommy and Tuxasta and Sheldon and you. I'm really delighted to be here today, and I want to thank the organisers for the opportunity to engage But just to jump in to respond to your question, I think the status of the constitutional debate has changed and changed utterly. 100 years of partition, 100 years of nationalist Republicans feeling unwanted and unwelcome here in Ireland, and even in this city of Derry, with its history of gerrymandering. So political unionism, I think, has been unable to share this place with us. And for as long as they are, and that's a question, the dominant majority, I think they never will. So I think the change has manifested itself, for instance, in the Good Friday Agreement test for a unity referendum, which I would argue has been met because of what I referred to as political unionism no longer being in the dominant majority. If we look, for instance, over the last 5 elections, which I know in some ways is a crude and maybe quite unscientific measure of constitutional preference, but nevertheless, I think it could be argued that there is no longer a majority in favour of the union with Britain. Now, I know some would rightly challenge me and say to me, well, how can you extrapolate that with certainty? And of course I can't. But I would say, well, test it. Because in my opinion, there's a growing momentum for constitutional change in support of Irish unity. And I think you'll not be surprised that I make reference to the Brexit referendum, because I think that's been a tipping point in the campaign for constitutional change. Like, people have reevaluated the constitutional arrangements on the island of Ireland, and the fact that we here in the North voted for Remain, yet we were removed from the EU, has further highlighted, I think, the undemocratic nature of the North. So throughout the whole withdrawal agreement discussion, Andre, there was an increase, a large increase, I think, in the volume of commentators and commentary on the future constitutional arrangement, and the folly of petition of the current constitutional position in the North, I think, has been exposed not just to Europe, but for many people who around the world who maybe didn't exactly understand what happened here 100 years ago. So our constitutional position, I think, is a challenge, obviously, in terms of for those of us who are seeking to change it. But I also think it's a challenge for the EU too. And I'll end with this, because once again, as we can see, the British government is playing fast and loose with another international agreement, the Brexit withdrawal agreement and the protocol. So Irish unity, I think, is a solution for us, for this Brexit mess, who want to change the constitutional position. But I think it's also a solution for the EU too.
That's really interesting. And I think you're absolutely right in terms of the number of people who are contributing to this. Maybe a number of years ago, it seemed to be something that was quite narrow, and now it's certainly broader, and probably this evening is testament to that. So I'll move to Stephen now, with your own perspectives on those questions.
Well, thanks very much, Andre, and thanks for the invitation to join this conversation. I may, over the course of this event, perhaps give a slight minority viewpoint compared to where most of the panelists are coming from. But it's important that we do have a frank debate around these various issues. And by way of introduction, it may be useful just to sort of explain where we're coming from in the Alliance Party in this regard. I mean, we don't define ourselves as a party around the constitutional question. It's about reconciliation, integration between peoples in Northern Ireland or the north of Ireland, as people may frame it. But we will have some members and supporters who are advocates of the union with Great Britain. We have also some members and supporters who are already advocates of a United Ireland. And there's many people in the party and supporters of the party that would have an open mind on the issue and could be open to persuasion in light of the arguments. We absolutely recognise that this is not a theoretical discussion. This is a real issue on the agenda, and it has been energised by the Brexit process in particular. But also, I think there's some people who are reacting against what they see as the nature of the current Johnson government in the UK. And they've also noticed in particular some of the more socially progressive changes that have happened in the south of Ireland, and that also poses a certain attraction as well. At present, we're not advocating a border poll. We don't think the conditions are met at this present moment in time. So it's not the centre point of our messaging. But we do respect that there is an active debate happening. And we think it's very important that we're in the room and that we're representing our constituents. And we certainly believe that other parties should also be in the room and trying to shape the discussion. So we're perfectly happy to engage in any rational, evidence-based, civilised discussions around these issues and to provide a constructive voice. And sometimes we may well be the awkward voice in the room asking some challenging questions, but we do think the dialogue is around this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. And I think that's very interesting. Do you think that you've more of a challenge now to what may have been a number of years ago when you first joined Alliance in terms of people having different constitutional views by having everyone under the one tent? Do you think that's changed?
Well, I mean, Alliance has never been solely defined around the constitutional question. So, but over time, things have changed. I mean, prior to Brexit, I mean, even though we had the Good Friday Agreement, which recognised all the different aspirations as being legitimate and for people to pursue, I don't think there was really much discussion or really much thought that constitutional change was likely in the short to medium term. I think that has changed fundamentally in the past 5 years, and while I don't think we're there yet, and there's a lot more discussions to happen, I do think that there has been that momentum. So we have to recognise that people are having those debates, and if we're not part of the discussion, you can't shape it.
That's really interesting. Thanks very much for that. Colin, I'm going to come to you and get your own perspectives. Coming from an academic background rather than a political background, you know, how have you seen this debate develop?
I suppose, first of all, to thank the organisers for the invitation to participate. You know, really delighted to be part of the conversation. I think we also need to acknowledge that although the discussion has intensified, that we're really it's a discussion that's been going on for decades and decades. You know, it's not a new discussion, right? So the work that we're doing is building on the hard work that many people have done over many years and decades, and we need to acknowledge that. So it's not a new debate at all, but it is an intensified debate. And I suppose in the academic world, it's really very, very simple. You know, the sheer volume and quantity of focused and detailed work that is now going on in relation to this question is just remarkable. You know, the number of universities on this island, across these islands, the number of civic society organizations here that are working not in the abstract, right, around the broad principles, but on the, you know, very concrete details of what the referendum process will involve, what a new Ireland might look like. So I would say, to me, while it's a long-running and very familiar debate, Brexit has accelerated the conversation really very, very dramatically. To me, and almost parking my own sort of personal take on all this, it does feel like something has changed. It feels like we're in a almost informal campaign, that's undeclared. The sense in which I think unionism is getting ready for this, political and civic. So I think there's an onus on those who are advocating change to really up their game, if you like, to step up the preparatory work. So my sense is that we're getting into the detail. It's beginning to become clearer what the processes will involve and even what a new Ireland might look like. And I suppose to end initial thoughts with this is where the tensions really begin to open up, right? Because you can be for the union and you can be for a united Ireland, right, in the abstract. But what does either of those propositions mean? So I think some of the most intriguing conversations that are going to happen in the weeks and months and days and years ahead is going to be around the detail. Because both in terms of the pro-union side and in terms of the United Ireland side, neither of those positions are monolithic. Yeah. There'll be those who see the opportunity for transformative change within the UK, and there'll be those who see the opportunity for transformative change within a united Ireland. So the tussles between the more conservative forces and the more transformative forces within both camps, if you like, could be some of the most intriguing conversations that are going to be had in the years ahead, I think.
It is very interesting, and I certainly noticed in terms of the, you know, who is doing what and gathering momentum. I noticed some recent articles that are noticing maybe last year, 18 months ago, we'd have thought maybe those who were pro-union weren't engaged, and now maybe we see that the tables have rather turned on that, where we see the pro-union voices are absolutely getting their act together, and quite rightly. And it's allowing for a very rich and complex debate. Brian, I'm going to come to yourself now in terms of your own thoughts. You haven't been involved in politics maybe as long as others who are here, but for yourself, what have you noticed change? And then I'll come to Niamh.
Well, thank you, Andre, and thank you to the Think 32 and the Gashard Failure for the invitation. The SDLP are happy to be involved and excited to be involved in the conversation around the future of the island. I think everyone has pointed out that Brexit has definitely ramped up the conversation and ramped up the opportunities around constitutional change on the island. And I think in the centenary year, you know, this gives us an opportunity, and I think Martina touched on this in her opening remarks, to look back at the last 100 years of this island and life on this island, and try and correct and look forward to the next 100 years and how that will be shaped. And I think that's a very, very exciting opportunity. As a young teenager, I remember the Gashard Failure being in its first year, and I attended many of the events of that. And I think you only have to look back as teenagers of that era and the Bogside and where we were at. The conversation then for us as teenagers was very much aspirational. Whilst Colin is saying it has been going on for decades, which I agree with, but it was very much aspirational. And if you had asked me then, would I have seen a united Ireland in my lifetime, I would have questioned that. But now I think it's actually a possibility, and it's probably more a reality than an aspiration. And I think it's something that we all should be very, very excited about. But I think it's also something that we have to, and I think Sean touched on this in his opening remarks as well. You know, it's not only about uniting the North and the South, it's about uniting the people. And I think that's a bigger challenge than winning any border poll or referendum. And I think that's something that we all need to be working on. This conversation around the future of the island can't be simply marketed as the 6 counties join the 26 counties and we all live happily ever after. It has to be around a new Ireland, and what a new Ireland will mean to all of the traditions of all of the people who call this place home. And I think that's a very, very exciting opportunity, but I think it's one that needs expanded out as well, which it is gathering pace, and there's no question on that. And as I said, I think Brexit has sped that process up. It is also one that we have to take our time at as well, to ensure that everyone right across this island from all traditions feels comfortable and confident that their tradition will be respected within the future constitutional position of the island.
Thank you, Brian. And again, you raised some really interesting points that we'll certainly be exploring over the little while we have together. Niamh, as the voice from the South, and without giving you the whole burden of that, but more of an opportunity, you know, have you seen the debate change, particularly coming from a Leinster House perspective?
Yes, of course I have, Andrea, and lovely to be with you tonight and my colleagues on the panel, and thank you very much to everybody who organises. Lovely to actually be having this debate. Yeah, I suppose, you know, I have grown up in a border county, and you know, that brings its own particular set of consequences too, in the sense that, you know, our schools were segregated. I went to a primary school that was for Catholics, and I'm from a generation where my friends now, you know, grew up and went to school in Protestant schools. And from the Good Friday Agreement, I have to say, over the last 20 years, I mean, that has melted away, that segregation, that difference, and there's so much more of a unity about us. And I'm talking about my own community, my own county at that. But from a political perspective, of course, the momentum has grown, and I think there's a real excitement that we can have the conversation. And I think, yes, I would agree with everybody here tonight. Brexit has certainly accelerated that. I suppose my concern would be that, like the Brexit debate became so polarised and perhaps not about the question that people were ultimately answering at all, because perhaps, you know, I would argue that the proper research wasn't done. The campaign became about something, you know, other than the question that were being put to people on the day. And I think the outcome of that is to be seen today for the people living in Britain. I'm always struck, actually, by, I think there's a whole generation, and obviously everybody in this panel living in the north would be far better able to answer this than me, but there is a generation, I believe, of people who are in their 30s and 40s who identify with both cultures and identify with both, I suppose, identities, and you know, don't see themselves as particularly Irish or particularly British, but kind of see themselves, you know, as Northern Irish. And I suppose what I think will make the success of this is allowing the space for that dialogue, allowing the space for that opinion, and allowing the space for that conversation. You would all know, since Taoiseach Micheál Martin was elected, he has single-handedly created the Shared Island unit within his own department. And I suppose there's a number of strategies to that. But I suppose from a government perspective, how the vision would be is that this is a conversation where all the voices are heard. But not just that, there's actually money allocated now for, I suppose, projects, tangible projects that allows various communities come together, be together, work together. And, you know, I can certainly say one thing: the Peace Plus and the Peace projects and the Peace funding in border counties certainly did exactly that. It brought communities together. It brought a generation of people together that had been up to that point segregated. So I suppose that would be the Taoiseach's view, and I think it's important to say that here tonight, that it's not about, you know, pushing a particular, I suppose, viewpoint. It's allowing it to ferment in an organic way that, you know, the question could be asked, I suppose, as Colin said there, with great detail. And I'm delighted to hear Colin's contribution there, talking about all the work, remarkable work, as you say, that's happening in the universities across the island too, in terms of getting into the level of detail, because I think that would be critical, that we don't have an outcome like what happened in England with Brexit.
Thanks very much for that. And that's it. I think there's plenty in what you're saying, Niamh, that brings us into our next question, which is, you know, what are the opportunities of the debate? And I suppose this is where people can nearly lay out the vision for their argument on the constitutional debate, but also just that wider thing of, you know, no matter where we land on the far side of this debate, can we be in a better place, and what are the opportunities to allow us in the better place, no matter whatever way we vote it happens or not? So I'm going to start with Colin with that and kind of work my way through, if that's okay.
Okay, I suppose the first point is really that people are engaged in this discussion because they feel we'll be better off. Like those who are advocating Irish reunification are doing so because they think there's an opportunity there to do things better. There's a sense that the island being divided in the way that it is unhelpful, that really it's about unleashing the potential of an all-island arrangement. Increasingly, Brexit has changed that discussion into a much more pluralist conversation about, you know, being part of the European Union and that wider transnational project without being uncritical of the EU. You know, it's the options there to rejoin the European Union through the Good Friday Agreement. And I think it's an opportunity to have that sort of open-ended discussion. I also think from an academic perspective, and look, we all know in this discussion, there are so many myths on the island. We don't know each other on the island. Partition has siloed people. It has siloed mindsets. So if one thing comes out of this discussion, it will be an evidence-based, myth-busting discussion about what's actually happening on the island now, you know, how we can share it better in the here and now. And, you know, all really Irish reunification is a new way of sharing the island in the future. You know, so I don't see any problem in using both the language of Irish reunification and the language of shared island, because I think they're the same thing. And so, if we can have an evidence-based, informed discussion that challenges some myths, it struck me recently, for example, in the work of Seamus McGuinness and at the SRI and John Doyle at DCU, is when you begin to look at some of the old economic arguments around subvention and, drill down into them, you begin to expose it where people are walking around with mythologies in their head. So I think we'll be better off. Which may sound an odd thing to say in conclusion, is, I've argued consistently that I think we will be better off for having this conversation. Now, people look at me when I say that because it tends to be framed in a sort of anxiety, fear-ridden worry about what might happen. But I genuinely think the island, north and south, will be in a healthier space for having had this conversation if it's had in a planned, prepared, and evidence-based way, obviously reframed in the context of what Brexit has done to the island and is doing to the island.
Thanks for that. And I'm just to tease out one thing, and not to put you on the spot, Colin, can you think of when you're saying about myths and myths that can be busted, can you think of one example of that we can go away with something that's tangible?
Well, I think, given the example of, for years and years and years, you had the subvention argument and various figures bandied around in terms of what that actually was. And I think then when you have people like Seamus and John going away and drilling down into that and questioning some of the figures, bringing that figure down substantially, discussions around the fact that it would be a managed transition for change. But also, people don't know how the health service in the south works. They don't know how the university systems in the south work. People in the south don't know how the health system in the north doesn't work. There's myths about the health service in the north that are precisely that, and that just gets thrown into the conversation unchallenged. So in some of those sort of socioeconomic debates and debates around the sort of economics of it, and obviously some of those arguments are then themselves contested, but I think there's concrete examples already in that last 12 months where some, fundamental myths around the discussions have been confronted head on by evidence from experts.
Yeah, and Niamh, I think I'll come to yourself next. Your colleague Jim O'Callaghan offered a very interesting paper on that not that long ago, where he took on some issues, but he really reimagined what the island might look like and gave some practical examples. And I know it was a very personal paper, but it kind of showed some thinking in Fianna Fáil that maybe we hadn't seen before.
Yeah, I mean, like Colin has alluded to there, I mean, there will have to be time given and set aside to get down into the detail. And I suppose, whether it be the education system, the health system, the local government system, all of those various departments, I mean, that would be an important part of all of the research. And I suppose time has to be allowed to allow that to happen, that when people are given the proposition and they are presented with the questions, that they know the full facts. I suppose that, and again, going back to the shared island, that would have been one of the visions that Micheál had in the sense of putting, money behind actual projects that benefit both north and south. As Colin said, there has to be something in it for everybody. And I suppose it's to create that vision of what a united Ireland, a shared island, or whatever that might be, will actually look like in everyday living for people.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting to see that those practical examples. Brian, your own party's come on a bit of a journey as well in terms of the debate and with its relationship with Fianna Fáil, and that was seen as quite a critical kind of axis on which the position of Fianna Fáil probably turned in terms of this. So for yourself, kind of in Derry, sitting there, what do you see as the opportunities of this debate, and explore some of it, maybe the opportunities of the vision as well for where we could be at the far side of the unity vote?
Well, I certainly hope that at the far side of a unity vote where we are, is we have a united people as well as a united Ireland, and I think that's one of the major opportunities that we have. But I think, as the other panelists have said, I don't think we will realise all of the opportunities that having a new shared island will look like, or what they are, until we have the actual debate and go through the process. There's no doubt that there's conversations like this going on, the length and breadth of the island at the moment, but it's very much an unofficial campaign, and until we hit into the campaign mode, design and shape out what the future of the island will look like, it will only be then that we will really reap the benefits as we go through each and every aspect of our life. Will we understand what the benefits of a united Ireland will be? I, like Colin, genuinely believe that we will all be better off in a united Ireland. There's no question of that in my mind. But in terms of nailing down what the opportunities are, I think we're a bit off on that, and we have a lot of work to do on that. There's a lot of work going on. Niamh has spoken about the shared island unit, and obviously you've referenced there the New Ireland Commission, which the SDLP have launched only a few months ago. There's a lot of work going on right across the island, and hopefully we will see more opportunities being flagged up and standing out as we go through the debate. But I think in terms of the opportunities that we see, I think the biggest opportunity for us here in the north is having a united people, and that's something I don't think, and I often worry about whether or not we will have a united people in the north, regardless of a referendum on Irish unity, and I don't think we will, because there's been too much hurt in the north across the last 50 odd years, and I think there's too much hurt there to try and heal that. And I think we now have to look at a different way to try and healing that. And I think the conversation around unity and the design and the shaping of a new country is something which everyone should be and can buy into. And I think then we will realise the opportunities and what it's actually like to live on an island with the united people.
I think that's really interesting, particularly given the very difficult developments on legacy and on how society is treating victims and survivors. It's very interesting to hear you say that you think the unity discussion could actually contribute to healing and be part of the solution to that. And I think that's maybe something that could be teased out more widely, and very interesting. Martina, I'm going to come to yourself next. Often this conversation is abstract, you know, that we need to have detail, and everyone talks about the need to have detail, but we don't have detail. You know, for yourself, what do you see the opportunities of the debate being?
The more I listen to debates like this, the more I'm involved in debates like this, all I see around me are opportunities. You know, I think the opportunities involve examining this tiny little world that we call home, and not just imagining a better future, but seeing how that can be a lived experience, you know, a reality. There is a slew of academic publications already done, and Colin referred to some of them, whether it's University of Ulster, Queen's, you know, Dublin City Universities, but particularly I think for this debate, even international work that's being done, the Vancouver University, the two Hübner reports mapping Irish unity. And I think this debate has opened up a world of opportunities in the form of knowledge and information and discussion and debates like this one here today, you know, on a range of issues. And this is happens when you're in a lunchtime and the phone will go off. Absolutely. So this is happens. This is the new reality of Zoom. So, you know, the opportunity, just picking up on what Colin said of the health systems, north and south. I think an all-Ireland health system, free at the point of delivery, would command widespread support across this island. You know, the Bengoa report here in the north and Sláintecare report in the south, both of those health reforms secured all-party support in both jurisdictions. And there are reforms in both health documents that would make integration towards reunification more straightforward. So, just picking up on what's been said around healthcare spending per capita in the south is greater than in the north. You know, in the north, we have been hit by austerity imposed by the British Tory party, which has hollowed out the so-called National Health Service, and access to services have been badly impacted. So the opportunity, for instance, just to name but one, an all-Ireland, you know, National Health Service I think it's being realistic, but it's also necessary. And there are a host of other opportunities that would manifest themselves in the establishment of a multicultural country, pluralist, open and welcoming, to all, a warm, progressive house for all, embracing all cultures, identities, abilities and disability. That vision, those opportunities are being discussed and debated, I believe, by more and more people. And I don't foresee, as Brian says, the North being stuck back onto the South, and that's going to constitute some kind of reunification. There's a whole range of economic and social opportunities that would be unlocked as we reach our full potential, I think, our full All-Ireland United potential, that would be good for every citizen from Derry right through to Kerry. I mean, you look at the North is the slowest growing economy on these islands. Derry and Donegal, indeed the entire border corridor has been resigned to peripheral status, and that's limited our economic ability. So in a new Ireland, a united Ireland, political reps would have access to borrowing, to taxation and to investment powers, which would, I think, allow for a unique strategy that could be targeted in terms of the growth of high value-added industries to develop more and better jobs for people. And that's what we all want for everybody that's a representative, whether you're elected or non-elected activists. You'll want to improve the lives of the people that we represent. So the two studies that, that have been done that I referred to, one was done, as you know, before Brexit, and one was after Brexit. And both of those Vancouver University reports from the Hubner reports, they forecast the vast potential of increased economic growth if the economic opportunities of reunification were realised. And I think this is where, partition has destroyed our opportunities. It has meant that the benefits of whether it is a transition to a zero carbon economy, because the green economy is something we all talk about, that has been, and that's going to continue, in my opinion, to be dampened significantly as both parts of this island compete against one another for private renewable investment, whilst opportunities and operating the two potential contradictory, green economic agendas, north and south. It's not going to work. So despite having some of the most, abundant renewable energy resources anywhere in the world, particularly I have to say in the Northwest, Derry and Donegal, the green economy across the island has underperformed in comparison to other places. And petition, I think, will keep us underperforming, and all of those opportunities, I believe, would be lost unless and until we reunite this country.
That's very, very comprehensive, and plenty for us to think about in those very practical ways, and particularly that geographical kind of focus is very important, because all of us can think of ourselves in where we live and what our experience has been. Stephen, when you opened up, you talked about the reconciliation model of alliance, and does this conversation about opportunities around unity, does that sound like it's a challenge to that, or does it sound like it's complementary to that?
I think it's likely to be complementary, and I think certainly the process of United Ireland, if it does come to pass, will pose challenges in terms of what is still the divided society of Northern Ireland, but that can be addressed through the nature of the debate and the outcomes. And I suppose the key thing to stress is that, just want to be very clear, I mean, I fully respect the 50% plus one rule in terms of determining the outcome of this, but the more comprehensive any referendum is, the better that will be for the future. Yeah. But even in the context of what may be a fairly narrow outcome, I think the more that people who are not supportive in terms of the first preference are able to at least acquiesce and be comfortable with the outcome, even though it wasn't what they wanted, then we'll be in a better place. So in some senses, whether it's some alliance voters or whether it's into unionism itself, there'll be people who will say, I'm a unionist, this is just simply not something I can, on the surface, get my head around. But the more that people are asked into conversations, the more there's a sensitivity to people's concerns, the more there's a recognition that the reconciliation project doesn't end with a United Ireland, that there'll be an ongoing process thereafter, then the more you can bring people into that tent and be comfortable with at least going along with what will be fairly fundamental and unprecedented constitutional change. But just two other things in terms of opportunities as well. I think, go back to what Niamh has been saying, there's a huge opportunity for economic, social, environmental cooperation, as Martina was stressing there as well, on the island, regardless of whether it is a prelude to something else happening politically and constitutionally, or whether on a standalone basis. Both parts of the island have turned their back on each other over the past 100 years, and even post-Good Friday Agreement, there hasn't been as much joined up working as there could have been. The north-south aspect of the Good Friday Agreement has been stop-start at times, and perhaps hasn't really lived up to its full potential. So there's a lot that can be done in that regard, which in its own right shouldn't really threaten anyone, because it's all about mutual benefits. And that's probably an area where we would stress that a lot of the initial work needs to happen without necessarily it having to lead somewhere else, though of course it may well do, just to create that safer space for discussions to take place.
I think that's quite true, and I think that those benefits, when you look at them and people realise that whatever way we vote, surely we'll get some of those benefits. Mm-hmm. At the far side, where we will be better off for having this debate, and I really hope for that. And of course, there are many people who will worry about the debate, and there will be worries about it. And I want to just go through the panel without being negative, and just kind of engaging with some of those fears that people naturally have, if I can. And I could term them as threats of the debate, or I could say what are the challenges of the debate. Maybe might be a bit easier. And I'll start this time with you, Stephen, and kind of work backwards from where I was before.
Sure. Well, I mean, maybe slightly to add a little bit of contrarianism to the debate. I suppose I'm not yet as convinced as some others in terms of some of the economic figures around how this works, particularly in terms of the financial budgetary considerations. Certainly there will be economies of scale that come with this, but I think there's a lot of financial pressure just from the scale of this invention. I appreciate people have different views on the figures around that. It's still going to be a fairly big ask, and there will be concerns within Northern Ireland of the impact in terms of people's the cost of living and the state of public services. As others have already identified, I mean, you all are crucially aware the NHS future is going to be an absolute core issue in terms of any discussions. This obviously sort of you can't really dictate the ideal circumstances for any border poll if it was to happen to take place. But I think we would suggest that if it happens in the context of a sitting assembly, I think that is a much more easy context where you've had a natural evolution towards it, as opposed to it happening in the context of a political crisis and a political breakdown, where people are almost forced into zero-sum choices. So I appreciate that forces may dictate that's the way it ends up, but I think it would be far preferable if this was happening in the context of an evolution in terms of discussions, and that there is a sitting assembly in Northern Ireland at that time, and that will also bring more people, at least in terms of acquiescence to any situation on the far side, if that was the way it worked out.
But that's really interesting, and something that probably doesn't get as much focus as it might do, though it might do closer to a time in terms of it. Niamh, your own thoughts around the challenges or any threats around this debate, or any worries that people are going to have, and how we might engage with them while we're enthusiastic about this debate.
Yeah, well, I suppose without sounding repetitive, I suppose the important thing is that people do feel that they can actually say what they're feeling, that they can be open and honest about it, that there is space for the minority voice in this as well. Because I think if we, be triumphalist, I suppose, in our tone, in the language that we use, it can place fear perhaps in maybe the minority view. And I suppose for me, I think what will be the success of this, regardless of the outcome of the referendum, which naturally I do want to see a united Ireland, and I would like to see it in my lifetime, is that the success of that will only be built on allowing an open and free space for people to say how they feel and what they feel, and to express their identity in a safe way. And to do anything other than that is where I think will cause threats, will cause angst, will cause fear, and have the opposite effect of what we're actually trying to achieve.
And I think that's true. I did something with a unionist commentator recently, and she talked about the heart and the head. And she said, you can win my head, but my heart, what are you going to do with my heart? And that really, really stuck with me. And I think that what you're saying is so important. Martina, I'm going to come to yourself next, as someone who's engaged with all kinds of challenges, whether it was Brexit, and then following, you were probably the first person I heard within the hours of us knowing that Brexit was happening. And that was the way the vote was saying now's the time for a border poll. I can remember it that night, and I have no doubt that you've dealt with that you're engaging with the challenges all the time since that day and hour.
I feel that, the threat to the debate, it's just constituting around what you just said. Because I remember that time saying it, and for some people it was shock horror. What? Those who seek to close the debate down, who seek to deny us our democratic right to plan and prepare. We have a right to work for a better future. We have a right to imagine and to bring about a better future, to explore that through debate and conversation, and a right to an agreed, endorsed process to get us to that place, as was outlined in the Good Friday Agreement. And we have a right to exercise our self-determination. So denying all of that undermines what was agreed in the Good Friday Agreement. And for me, I feel it's like a modern day extension of colonisation, because it's like the colonisation of the mind, telling people that the time is not yet right. Don't scare the horses. For those who do not support or who do not want reunification, and that person you talk to, I can feel for them in terms of their heart and what they're saying. And we have to be careful and be kind and be gracious and understand. But for those who are uncomfortable with even the conversation, and equally those who are comfortable in this place, in their position in this place, and for them to tell us who seek to have a different future that we have no right to talk about it, no right to debate it, no right to advocate that we should plan and prepare. Now, I'm a rock solid Irish Republican, a member of Sinn Féin, and Fine Gael, Leo Varadkar is not somebody that I make a point of quoting, but it struck me when I listened to him recently, because he said, it's always going to be the wrong time to have this debate, to those issues that was raised around Irish reunification. And it's always going to be the wrong time for those arguing against the tide of change. So threats from to this debate, I think, from establishment parties, if you want to call them that, who do not sort of push for change because they're comfortable in their own status that they hold, or are comfortable where they are in this world, however small its world is for them. Then I feel that the whole democratic process of us having to plan and prepare, because what Niamh has said is right. We don't want what happened in Britain to be emulated here in any way. The threat from not planning and preparing, could result in the same kind of referendum that Niamh talked about that took place in Britain. So if we've learned anything from Brexit, it's about not to carry out a referendum in a particular manner. And the British government did not know how it was going to leave the EU because it didn't plan and it didn't prepare. And I think that's the threat to the debate. So now they never left anywhere. And I have said this, and I warned the EU, they've never left any country, any place, any space in the world without leaving it in a mess. And what Frost is doing at this moment in time, and I told him, I got an opportunity that other people didn't, look him in the eye and remind him that his fingerprints was on every page of the protocol that they are now trying to undermine. So I think it's politically irresponsible, and it's a threat to the debate, to the conversation, and undermining of the Good Friday Agreement. For instance, in the South, and I say this to Niamh, there should be a joint Oireachtas committee on Irish unity. That needs to be established. We need to set up an All-Ireland representative civic assembly or whatever other form to plan for Irish unity. The Irish government needs to publish a white paper. I'd say to Fianna Fáil, they need to publish a white paper on reunification. The Irish government needs to set out proposals on what's the future legislative changes going to be look like. Like Sinn Féin produced its own green paper. Colin said this debate is going on for decades. In 2005, Irish Sinn Féin's All-Ireland coordinator, we produced in 2005 a green paper on Irish unity, on proposed new laws and policies. Now it's quite out of date, it was 2005. And here we are so many years later. So, the threat for us, I think all, regardless of what we are doing, I think it applies more so now that if we fail to inform people, if we fail to give people the material so we can chew over and have an informed debate, then from my perspective, who wants to see this country reunited, if we fail to prepare, then we prepare to fail. And that's something that I think this debate, and those who are having the debate, they do not want to see that happening as an outcome of the vast array of conversations that are taking place.
Thank you for that. Colin, I'm going to bring you in next on this question around, you've certainly spent much time having to speak about the legitimacy of the debate, but also the legitimacy of your voice in the debate. And I think that you would bring a unique perspective to the challenges that is involved in this debate, but might want to speak more widely on that.
It's a great question, and just reflecting on it, there's probably two threats, maybe to be slightly provocative about it. I think the first threat is there's a threat of people not getting on with it. And what I mean by that is this, that United Ireland advocates are masters of procrastination. You know what I mean? Masters of not actually spelling out what the proposal is, and will invent all sorts of abstract hurdles as to why the case cannot be presented on what a new and united Ireland looks like. And that, to me, is a threat and a worry that I have, because that creates uncertainty and it destabilizes what is a conversation that's really now gained traction. So a threat to the process is people now not getting on with spelling out the case. Because ultimately, let's be clear, if you're advocating a new and united Ireland, at some point when we are back doing this, somebody's going to have to knock on the door and say, here's the literature as to what I am proposing. And if you're an advocate of a united Ireland and you have nothing tangible to say on the doorstep when you do that, that's a big concern. Or you're inventing all sorts of obstacles why you can't do that. I'll also say something else. Look, we need to also be clear when we talk about mutual respect. Many unionists will quite rightly not join this conversation, and they'll be absolutely right to do so, because they will be making the case for remaining within the United Kingdom. And I think there's too many advocates of United Ireland who somehow think that unionism, political or civic, will transform overnight into advocates of a United Ireland. If that transformation happens, they're no longer essentially unionists anymore. They're advocates for United Ireland. So there's a tremendous naivety in the United Ireland camp, if you like, that creates a lot of muddled, confused thinking. A referendum will be, let's be clear, it will be divisive because people will be arguing for opposite. Elections are divisive. You know, elections to the Assembly, the Oireachtas, are divisive. You have different parties making the case. So I think there's a terrible naivety in the United Ireland camp around some of that. And that's a major threat to getting the actual work done at the moment for me. I think the second thing I'm worried about a threat is party political disagreements. And so I make a plea to political parties tonight, particularly those who are arguing for United Ireland, that you can have all your party political disputes about everything else, right? And I'm an academic, right? But on this issue, I think it's important that those advocating a United Ireland, just like those advocating maintenance of the union, from a party political perspective, find a way to overcome their differences and to work together in the public and national interest. Respecting the different positions everyone has, but recognizing that if these referendums are going to be won north and south, then people are going to have to work constructively together, recognizing the strengths and weaknesses that everyone has, the audiences that people can appeal to and maybe people can't appeal to, and an honest recognition of the contribution that everything can make. But I think it would be disastrous to me if the party politics on the United Ireland side got in the way of producing agreed, deliverable proposals for change. And I'll just, I have the luxury as an academic of naming this for what it is. I think there's a risk that it'll be everybody against Sinn Féin, which has a habit of happening on the island, or the other parties saying that they're the only way this can be delivered. I think everybody has a contribution to make, and no one party can deliver this. So I would make a plea to the political parties to find a way to work together to try and park their disagreements on this issue and recognize that the national and public interest is more important than party political disagreements. But obviously it's very easy for me to say that. So thank you.
Thank you for saying something that is difficult to say and difficult to hear, I'm sure. Brian, I'm going to come to yourself. When you opened up, you talked about people unity, the unity of people. And, when in this discussion, we've raised some of the challenges to that. It's going to be a difficult divide. By its very nature, there are people who are going to win and there are people who are going to lose on the far side of it. So how do you see the meeting of those challenges for this debate?
Well, I think, first of all, what we have to do is we have to unite the campaign. We've talked an awful lot, I have talked an awful lot about an unofficial campaign that we're going through at the moment, but I think we have to officially pull and unite the campaign. And I think Colin touched on it, where party political views should not be getting in the way of this. This is in the national interest, and everyone should be going at it in that sense. And I think the Irish government have a big role to play in that, to pulling people together from right across society, from political parties and everyone who wants to be involved in this conversation, to come together, shape what the future of the island is going to look like, design it, and then have the document that Colin talked about to go out onto the doorsteps, which is an agreed document by, as it's been phrased, the United Ireland camp, which we all can go out collectively and individually within our own communities, and sell that view and that vision of the company to all of the people. But I think one of the threats as well around the future or even the debate is people who are pretending that this debate isn't going on, and we are seeing that right across, particularly here in the north. For example, in Derry and Strabane Council, we have an Irish Unity Working Group. When we were having the debate about setting up that Irish Unity Working Group, which we supported, the response from unionist colleagues on the council was, we will not be attending. I don't think that's helpful. I understand why they're not going, but I don't think that's helpful. We've also seen comments from political unionism when asked about the future of the island and what would they do in the event of Irish unity, and some have said that they would leave Ireland and leave the north. I don't think that's helpful either. I think what we have to do is we have to understand that people are, whether we like it or not, and I wish that they didn't, but they will. People are going to vote against unity, and that's fine. But I think we also need people to have confidence in their own belief to come and join the debate. And I would really, really like someone to try and convince me or even share their view with me why I am better served in a union with Britain. I don't think we are. I'm very confident that we're better served in a united Ireland, and I'm confident that as a party and as a society we can sell that vision. I would like someone to come and join the conversation and to explain to me why or how they believe that we would be better off served in a union with Britain. And I don't think that they are confident in their view, and I think that's why people, particularly in political unionism, are pretending that this conversation isn't happening. And that's a real threat to the campaign and to the debate, in my opinion, because very, very quickly they're going to be faced with the realisation that this debate is happening, that it is picking up pace, that there is a vision for the future, and that they have to deal with it. And Niamh talked at the beginning about Britain not dealing and not preparing for the outcome of the Brexit campaign, and I think that political unionism is going down that road and not understanding that there's preparation work being done in terms of the future of this island, and I think that they need to get involved in it. But I think we, as United Ireland camp, if you want to explain it like that, have to show and have to be very, very clear that we are prepared and willing to show mutual respect, and we are willing to learn about the different traditions and different cultures, both north and south, and internally then, I suppose, within the north, and we are able and prepared to make allowances and include the different traditions on the island. And I think that way we will build confidence in the campaign and deliver what the campaign should be aiming for.
Developing some of that thinking, Brian, and alluding to some of what Martina was talking about earlier, excuse me, Bertie Ahern a little while ago talked about maybe the anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, 2028 as a date for a referendum. What are your own thoughts about timescales and planning? You've hinted at some of that. And, in 2021, what do you think needs to be, what would be the priorities now for this big piece we keep on talking about, the planning piece?
Well, I think the priority in 2021 is that the Irish government need to take this campaign by the scruff of the neck and bring everyone who wants to be involved in it into the one room, or obviously can't do that with COVID, but bring them all together and make sure that we are all working towards the one vision. Go through individually each of the public services and each aspect of our life and get agreement from everyone. And that's going to be a very, very difficult job to do. I have no doubt about that. But that is the roadmap that we need to be delivering on. And once you've got one agreed, we move on to the next and the next and the next until everything is covered. But you can't do that if people aren't engaged in the campaign. You talked there about Bertie Ahern, and he mentioned 2028. I'm reluctant, really reluctant to put a date on any referendum, because I think there's far too much work to do before you can put a date on it. For example, the Yes campaign for Scottish independence, they had a document 607 pages long of how their country would be governed and how their public services would be run in the event of independence, and they still lost. We have got lots of ideas and different political parties and right across society, and some people have referenced some of the papers that have been developed on Irish unity, but we've got no agreement even within the campaign. And I think until we do that, it's very, very dangerous, in my opinion, to be putting a date around any referendum. And I think we've got to get together, get the work done, and plan for the referendum then. Because remember, the referendum is not, for me anyway, the referendum is not the end goal. Irish unity is. The referendum is a hurdle that we have to get over, but we have to get over a number of hurdles before we get to a referendum. And I think the planning work and the preparation work that Martina talked about is something that we really need to get engaged on. And I think the only people that are able to bring everyone together is the Irish government to come out and sell this view of what the country is going to look like to the wider public across the island.
Thank you, Brian. Martina, very briefly, because we're actually running out of time, believe it or not. You've already mentioned the white paper and the Joint Oireachtas Committee. What are your own thoughts around, particularly on timescales?
Well, as you say, Berkeley Munich 2028, and I know Colin put out a date as well, and Uachtaráin Sinn Féin, Mary MacDonald, has indicated a 5-year time frame. So, taking it from now, for instance, if that was possible, then that would take us up to 2026, which is not far off 2028. So, whatever the date is, I think a date would concentrate and would lead to the preparation work being done. I think if we started to pull together, there's been a range of work being done from different universities, gathering the material, coming together with that information. And if you had a date to focus minds, I think that would actually inform and accelerate the conversation, engaging more and more people, giving people informed information. And, given that Brexit happened, as we've said, and we all agreed, without that work being done, then we don't want to emulate that here. And we can't ignore the fact that civic nationalism is mobilising, and the debate is already happening. Think 32, here we are today, Ireland's Future, a host of other organisations doing roadshows and kitchen table conversations. So whether it's Bertie's date or Colin's date or Mary Lou's time frame, I would say let's see it. And I think the voice of civic unionism, there's some voices coming on board, making welcome contributions, Trevor Long and others. So, and when we're talking about a date, I think it's important that we also remember April 2017, because over 4 years ago, I stood in the European Council on that day when the EU Council statement was agreed by all 28 member states, including Britain. And they signed off and they spoke to the people of Ireland and said, in the event of Irish reunification, the whole of Ireland would remain in the EU. And maybe your friend that you spoke to and said, how do you win my heart? There's lots of people from across the two traditions. They feel European as well. So the date might be pushed back from birthday or brought forward, but for sure, it's coming. So that's, I think, one of the realities of this conversation. And that's why it's important to plan and to prepare and have reasonable, sensible conversations. Because as Colin Harvey said, in more ways than one, in more times than enough, we're the sensible people in the room. We are the reasonable people in the room. And this is a reasonable, sensible, legitimate debate and conversation. And it's one that this country needs to have accelerated and taken forward.
Thank you. Stephen, have you got thoughts about dates, timescales, but also who needs to be driving it at the moment?
Yeah, thanks, Andre. I have to say I'm getting slightly worried about some of the comments that have been made in the past few minutes around this one. So I'm going to be slightly more contrarian around some of this stuff.
Okay,
but,
good.
First of all, I mean, the conditions for a border poll are not yet met. This is a condition-led process, not a timescale-led process. And obviously it is for the UK government to make that call in relation to Northern Ireland. Now, I appreciate Colin in particular and others have been pushing doggedly for some clarification exactly what are the indicators that will be used in making that decision. So that's a fair discussion to happen. But this will happen when the conditions are right for a poll to take place. I personally think one will happen in the not so distant future. I think we're building up to that, especially given the momentum of recent years. Where I'm getting slightly concerned is this sort of rush ahead, so to say, look, we are legitimate voices, that we have to make this happen, and if others aren't on board, they're not on board. Absolutely, I recognise this is a perfectly legitimate debate, and I do believe that for now, in particular, political parties and civil society in both parts of the island of Ireland will make the running on all of this. But my appeal would be, don't give up and dismiss other voices in this regard. Don't see it as a burden that you have to overcome. It's important that people are engaged, and recall the point I made earlier on, that even if people who oppose the process and will always oppose the process of United Ireland may nonetheless be comfortable with the outcome, based upon the fact that they have been part of a conversation and have had things explained to them. It's not going to be their first choice, but at least they may be more comfortable with the outcome. And if we are to learn lessons from history, I mean, clearly everyone here is very clear on the lessons from the Brexit referendum of having a clear white paper in place. And I do think at some stage the Irish government will have to produce that. But the other lesson in history is, if you go back 100 years, more or less, and look what happened whenever you had two states that were created on the island of Ireland, almost ran through majoritarian terms, and there was a substantive minority in both jurisdictions who felt very embittered by the outcome. And that's a situation that I think we almost certainly want to avoid this time around. I appreciate not everyone will be comfortable with decisions that are made. What's important is to try to create as big a tent as possible for this process.
Well, if that's contrarian, I can sign up to that. I think we all can. Colin, I'm going to come to yourself next around this, because you have mooted dates and you've talked about who needs to be driving this. You know, has that evolved over time, or are you just feeling a great sense of frustration at this stage?
No, I think ultimately it's worked, yeah, in terms of, because it has nudged people along. I think the time frame issue is around the frustration that many people have felt, that, you know, we've all heard that people go into rooms without planning and then nobody does any planning. And yes. I think a time frame has been said focuses minds on an actual, you know, event that will happen. And to get the planning work, I think, to get the planning done, I think the lack of certainty and the lack of clarity is destabilizing. So it's part of a stabilization agenda to provide the parameters, and a time frame helps. I understand entirely Stephen's point about it being condition-led, but I'll just personalize it. You know, Brexit alters that conversation dramatically. Yes, there's a duty to hold a poll at any time. It's a duty to hold a poll, but there's also, you know, discretion to hold a poll at any time as well. And I think I'll just put this point out here. You know, I would like a choice of returning to the European Union. We're watching the British government potentially undermine a protocol that it agreed to. And the elephant in the room conversation is, we have an open, accessible, agreed way to return to the EU, but nobody wants to talk about it. You know, we hear endless debates about the protocol and nobody mentions it. You know, it seems to me absolutely staggering that that's the case. But maybe just to end with the driver, yes, the Irish government, but I think there needs to be an all-island citizens' assembly established. I think, you know, civil society has an absolutely vital role to play. And I think I would like to see an all-island citizens' assembly established by the Irish government, you know, immediately, as soon as possible this year. And I think as many people as possible, those citizens' assembly have been shown to deliver results. So I think I would like to see that happen. But just end by saying that, you know, back to an earlier point, there are going to be tensions and difficulties. You're going to have people in both camps of diametrically opposed ideological positions going to have to agree or have a proposition which they're agreed to, which there'll be tensions formulating. So part of the reason for procrastination is a very good one, because we're now entering, I think, probably the most difficult part of the conversation, where people who have very different views about rights and equality, about social justice, about how the way the economy should be organized, the way the health service should be organized, are going to have to sit around in virtual or other rooms and work through their differences and see if it's possible to come up with agreed propositions that, Stephen has raised this before. I think absolutely right. Stephen has said in other conversations, I want to see the detail. I want to see what this new and united Ireland that you're talking about actually looks like. And I think Stephen and that is absolutely right. I think those advocating change need now to focus on producing that sort of a document that will begin to persuade people for change. And bear in mind, ultimately, at the end of the day, these will be two referendums, north and south, that people will want to, win, and have to win. And those advocating change in the north will have, an uphill struggle, really, to persuade a majority of people to vote for change. So I think that's a very long way of answering your question. I would like to see civic engagement, but ultimately this evening, the spirit of my contribution this evening is we need to move to the point where we have proposals and documents that are agreed propositions about what a new and united Ireland needs to sit down together to talk that through. And we need civic society to help those conversations to advance, because I think we're in an informal referendum campaign, but I think very soon we may be in a formal referendum campaign. So I think the more prepared we are, as has been said repeatedly tonight, the better. So thank you.
Niamh, the British Secretary of State could call a border poll in the morning, and we'll have had spent the past 4 years talking about this. Whether it's the idea of white papers, Oireachtas committees, citizens' assemblies, they're not new ideas. Do you think, sitting in the Oireachtas with your perspective, those things are closer now that you're starting to see more flesh being put on bones?
I do. And I suppose I'm taking copious notes here of what everybody I feel there's a very clear message for me to carry back to Taoiseach and the government and everybody here tonight. And I mean, look, it's in here, it's in our hearts, but there is absolutely, I suppose, a palpable excitement. There's a palpable desire, and I hear what everybody's saying. Procrastination, Colin, probably is our biggest downfall for those of us who are on the nationalist idea and on that question in terms of providing the detail. So I suppose what I will take from tonight's meeting is a very clear message. And as I said, and I began with, since Taoiseach has taken up that role, and within a very short space of time, you can see his commitment to it. And yes, it's about ideology, but it's about more than that. It's about, I suppose, investment in practical infrastructure that benefits every community, north and south of the border. And I know that his vision is something that it will happen organically. It'll be a journey that brings everybody on board for that journey, that we will reach the point that we can have that border poll. And yes, of course, we know these things are always divisive, but as I said, not divisive that it puts people in polar opposite ends of the argument, which is where we don't want, to push people. But I think, for me, and I feel, as the only representative here from the Oireachtas, I've been given a very clear list of things to do. And just to answer the question, I mean, Bertie Ahern, he was such a champion for peace on this island, such a champion for North-South relations. And of course, I suppose to answer the question as clearly as I can, a date sooner rather than later, but also ensuring that level of detail, that vision is there in black and white. And going back to Martina's idea too of an Oireachtas committee, that everybody's involved in the conversation politically and also the civic engagement that's necessary too. And Colin's absolutely right when he says that our Citizens' Assembly have delivered, and they've delivered on questions, that the public, have been maybe thinking and not having the opportunity or the vehicle to discuss. And they've proven very, very positive and very fruitful. So as I said, I have a very long list of things to do from this conversation here tonight. And thank you very much, everybody.
No, not at all, Niamh, and thank you for your openness around that. I'm going to finish with just a quick question. Question was less of a question than a reflective piece. All of us engage in these conversations and we all learn something new. So I'm going to ask each of you in turn, what have you learned that's new tonight, or maybe something that you want to think a little bit more about? And I'll start with yourself, Niamh.
I think I've just told you that one. Very practical suggestions that have been made here tonight. And look at, the wonderful thing, I suppose, Stephen, you've called yourself the contrarian, or the opposition, not the opposition, maybe the person who interrogates the question, and that's really important. And it's I love about tonight being able to have those conversations in a friendly way without people falling out over these things. Of course, as the debate heats up, people will obviously fall out over these things. Maybe. I think tonight has been fruitful for me in that you have made a few very practical suggestions, and I think the one thought I will go away with tonight is that word procrastinating that Colin so eloquently put. I certainly don't want to have a political legacy left behind when Niamh Smith, whenever she would finish her time in Dáil Éireann. Just a small anecdotal thing. My great grandfather Paddy Smith, who still holds the record as the longest serving Dáil Éireann member, 53 years in the Dáil. And I know, he got elected first as a Sinn Féin TD in Cavan and then when Fianna Fáil was established, he, along with Countess Markovich and others, moved to Fianna Fáil. But, 53 years is a phenomenal legacy to leave Dáil Éireann. I have no doubt I will never see the colour of it. I don't think too many people will, because politics has become so different, I suppose, from those times. But I would want my legacy in terms of this particular question, in terms of creating peace in our Ireland and ensuring that we have a united Ireland, not to be a procrastinator, to be somebody who actually did something about it.
Thank you so much, and I'm so glad that you were part of our conversation tonight. It's the first time I've heard you speaking on this. Thank you. I'm going to come to Brian next with the same thing, with the exact same question. Have you learned something new, or what are you going away with?
Well, I think in conversations like this, if you can't take something away, something that you've learned, then you weren't listening correctly. And I think for me, and I think Colin touched on it earlier, this conversation shows that from a party political side, that we can put those differences aside and have this debate and discussion in a respectful manner. And I think that bodes well for the future, when we see how many different ideas and how many different ways that we believe, both internally, how we can deliver a united Ireland. It can be done in a respectful manner, and the obvious outcome for everybody and the obvious end goal in all of this is Irish unity. Whilst we may be coming at it from different angles, that's the outcome, and I think tonight shows that this can be done in a respectful way.
Thank you so much, Brian, and it's lovely to hear that. Martina, what about yourself?
Well, I have listened to everyone intensely, and I think what I've learned is that I have 2 ears and one mouth, and that I should listen twice as much as I talk. And but I think I've learned some reinforcing things. Like I've learned that I'm right and others are right to want to exercise my right to self-determination, and that I've learned that, I'm right to want a democratic pathway back into the EU. And I've learned that the planning and preparing is absolutely crucial, that we've all been arguing for, but when you're listening to debates like this, it's reinforcing. And I suppose I have learned that, you started off talking about this being the centenary year of partition. It is the first. And I think listening to this discussion tonight I've learned it will be the last.
Thank you, Martina. What about yourself, Stephen? Who you weren't half as contrary as you thought you were.
Oh, I have to try hard. I have to try harder next time then. But I have learned that we are more than capable of having a very respectful debate around these issues. I mean, I do come to this debate with an open mind. So I mean, I'm not here as an advocate of Irish unity. But I am someone who's happy to consider all the arguments and looking forward to any more documentation that can be presented in that regard. Certainly not going to fall out with anyone on the back of this, and I certainly respect the determination that people have to address the issue and to do so in a managed way. And particularly learning some of the lessons from the past, and that certainly does give me hope and encouragement, even though I'm not necessarily in the same space in terms of the outcome at this particular point in time. But who knows where the future may go? And if we've learned anything, that particularly in recent years, politics is extremely uncertain, and forces are at play and are changing the situation very, very dramatically. So happy to continue in the debate and to encourage more people, particularly from Northern Ireland, to participate, even from other backgrounds who maybe who at this stage aren't even as open-minded as I am on the issue. I think the more people are exposed to the arguments backwards and forwards, the better.
Thank you so much. And what about yourself, Colin? Have you learned something new, or have you got final thoughts of reflection?
A final reflection is just, as I've been doing for the last number of years, repeating myself. I think there's a onerous responsibility on those who are advocating change to make their case crystal clear and to do the work that's needed in order to make the proposition to those who are persuadable of the case for change. And I think United Ireland advocates have thus far been heroic in their ability to avoid having those what are going to be tough, detailed, technical, and at times tense conversations about what the offer is to people who are open to persuasion about the case for change, respecting the fact that there are many people, quite rightly in the North, who will not want to be involved in the conversation about designing a united Ireland, but who will instead be making the case for maintaining the union with Britain, as is their right to do so. So I think we just need to get on with making the case for change, producing the sort of document, that Brian and others have talked about this evening, and putting it to people and seeing if they're persuaded.
Thank you. I suppose my learning from tonight is that we're all great at avoidance, and that and sometimes the fear of something is far, far greater than actually doing it. And so, and tonight is a contribution to that. And so I want to thank the Gas Yard Failure, and I want to thank Think 32 for the opportunity for us to meet together and have what's been a wonderful conversation. And I broke my rule. We went for overtime, but I think it was well worth it, because I think we all did learn. So thank you all for a meal my agad.
Oh, God, then, and thanks very much, Andrea, to you too.
Thanks, Andre. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.